Hello and welcome to another episode of Another Good Decision, the vodcast by the Governance Institute of Australia. My name is Patrick Gallagher and today we're joined by Governance Institute's Catherine Maxwell, General Manager of Policy and Advocacy. Catherine, welcome.
Thank you.
Today we're going to be discussing a little bit about the recent release of the joint guidance on AGMs using technology. Perhaps you could give us a bit of a background on that.
Sure. Well, one of the things we worked on very hard during COVID was getting legislation through to help companies use technology to hold annual general meetings. That happened about 3 years ago in 2022, and there was an independent statutory review last year which recommended that there be some guidance on using technology at AGMs. So we've partnered with the Australasian Investor Relations Association, the Business Law section of the Law Council and the AICD to produce the joint guidance, which we really hope is going to help companies when they're thinking about using technology at an AGM.
Well, on that topic of using technology, how does the guidance look at the benefits of AGMs using technology with the risk of diminishing shareholder engagement and transparency?
Absolutely. So, and that's a really important point. And I think technology is there to enhance the experience for shareholders. Some companies will decide that an in-person, a traditional AGM is best for them. There are some companies who are able, because of their constitutions, to hold an AGM that's virtual because that works for them and for their shareholders. But it's really about thinking about is a hybrid, which is quite a common format these days, which involves an in-person component and also using technology to have other shareholders in. So it's really about thinking about how the use of technology is going to enhance the ability of shareholders to participate and give them a reasonable opportunity to participate.
So I guess, what are some of the challenges an organisations might face if they're holding a wholly virtual AGM? And how do boards assess risks and challenges around that? Okay,
well, not that many companies hold virtual-only AGMs. When the legislation was passed, it was a requirement that their constitutions had to permit it. So while there are a few companies that hold virtual AGMs, and some of those couple of them are tech companies, and so their shareholders are quite happy. But most companies who are going to use technology at an AGM will have a hybrid AGM. So it's really about, and this I guess is something that boards need to think about every year, what is the best format for our AGM this year? Thinking about the type of company we are, thinking about our shareholder base, have we got a large retail shareholder base? Are we mostly institutions? Are we mixed? Are there particular issues facing the company that would warrant holding a hybrid rather than a traditional AGM? So it's really about thinking about all those issues when you're thinking about what format your AGM is going to take this year.
And how does the guidance interpret the requirement for reasonable requirement to participate in virtual hybrid AGM?
Reasonable opportunity to participate, which is a great lawyer's phrase. So really it looks at it from two aspects. First, the technology must be reasonable, and then there must be a reasonable opportunity for members to ask questions and make comments verbally and in writing. So it's kind of those two components. Mm-hmm. Technology reasonable, particularly for large companies. There are a number of providers who have platforms that you can use to hold a meeting using technology, and they're fairly sophisticated and have a good experience. For smaller companies, not-for-profits, companies limited by guarantee, there are a number of platforms, Zoom, Teams, that you can all use to hold a meeting of your members annually. So the technology must be reasonable. For example, it would be unreasonable to get people to dial in by telephone. That really wouldn't be reasonable because it wouldn't be necessarily replicating the experience. So it's thinking about, and if you're going to use, for a large company, if you're using a meeting platform, that technology will of course be reasonable. And it would be reasonable for a small company to use something like Teams or like Zoom. And then I think the next aspect is really about making sure that your shareholders have a reasonable opportunity to participate. You're never going to be able to completely replicate a physical meeting using technology, but it's about getting it as good as it can be. I think that's really what the guidance is directed at, so that everybody who wants to participate can.
And on that topic, you mentioned trying to replicate something as close to meeting in person. How does the chair or the meeting host maintain authority and sort of control when you're looking at a virtual environment like that?
Yeah, well, chair plays a really important role at any meeting, but it's going to be even more complicated in a meeting using technology because you've got more moving parts. So, the chair has an inherent authority to manage the meeting, but it's about good rehearsals and being briefed, and about making sure that you have got a handle and a plan for all the things that go to making up the meeting. So how you're going to, it's really about, for example, making sure your notice of meeting is really clear and absolutely tells people how they can participate. So one of the things the guidance does is suggest some wording that you could use in your notice of meeting for the type of meeting to make it really clear so that shareholders know what they're up for and what the experience will be. It's then about thinking about things like how we will manage questions. We'll typically, particularly for large companies, you might get lots of questions. It varies, but it will depend on the company. You might have a review function, so you'll have questions will go through to a group of reviewers, typically the company secretary or the investor relations team, who will look at the questions. And you get some questions, for example, that might be a customer service issue. So really they're much better handled by a customer service team. So it's about thinking through how you're going to manage questions. Some companies use moderators, really just to read the questions, and then they're handed to the chair for a response. So it's about just managing all those aspects.
Absolutely. And we mentioned before an independent review. What did that find in terms of unlisted entities being able to hold virtual-only AGMs?
It found that really unlisted companies, so that's small companies, companies limited by guarantee, that's lots and lots of charities are companies limited by guarantee, shouldn't have to have a constitutional amendment to hold a virtual meeting. It was a suitable form for them. In fact, lots of companies limited by guarantee have found that it's increased engagement because they often have members. So if you have a broadly dispersed membership or lots of sort of older people who live in the country, it's pretty easy for them to jump on an online meeting. So they really found that was a good experience for them. So they have recommended that they shouldn't have to amend their constitutions. The government's agreed to all of the recommendations of the independent review, but they haven't actually passed the legislation yet. So it's still a sort of watch this space, but they certainly thought that there's no reason why those sorts of companies shouldn't be able to have a virtual-only meeting.
Absolutely. And broadly speaking, is there anything else significant coming out of this particular guidance? I know that there is a checklist, and our members do like checklists. So
they absolutely love a checklist. So we were pretty keen to have one. There's a pretty good checklist at the end, that just to guide you through the steps before for an AGM. But it also looks at sort of some of the things you might want to think about in terms of managing questions. Some of the considerations you often will have. People will ask repetitive questions at AGMs, and they don't necessarily feel that they've been heard. And there are ways of managing and making sure that you try and make sure that people know that their question has at least been heard. So we've got some suggestions in there about practices you might want to think about if appropriate. But it's really about sort of thinking through all of the points we make in terms of, and just making sure that you've covered those off as part of your planning and also as part of your preparation for an AGM. Because an AGM, it's like a stage show, really. It's just about rehearsals and planning and thinking about and brainstorming about, what might go wrong. And the first thing in our checklist says, look at last year's AGM. Do a post-implementation review and think about how you might improve it for this year. So that's number one task. Think about what you did last time.
Absolutely. Well, no, that's all for AGMs. I really appreciate your insight there. The other thing I wanted to chat about today is from a Governance Institute policy perspective.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on. We've
Always.
been focusing particularly a lot on, the faith and trust in institutions, faith in institutions. What does that mean from a governance perspective? Building good governance. What's on the horizon coming up, and some of the big topics that are driving, good governance?
Well, we do. It's actually a really good piece of work. We've done it, and it's pretty exciting. We're coming up to the 10th year this year, our annual ethics index. So this is a survey of 1,000 people whose demography is the same as the broad general population, and we ask them pretty much the same, but each year we have topical questions. So the 10th annual ethics index is coming out in September this year. So that's always useful from a policy point of view, and it's really, when we're doing policy and making policy work and making submissions, it's amazing when you look in there to sort of see how often something that we're writing about is picked up in that survey. So it'll be fascinating to see how things have moved over the last 10 years. But when we were thinking about the sorts of policy work we do, it really falls into kind of two very broad themes. So it falls into sort of trusted public institutions. So you would see things like, we've done a lot of work on whistleblowers, which is a very important part of an ethical organisation, because whistleblowers are often a really good way of finding out that something's wrong in an organisation. So one of the things we've got on the horizon, there's a parliamentary inquiry into the establishment of a whistleblower protection authority. So we'll be making a submission to that inquiry. We've also co-sponsored the 4th annual Whistleblower Symposium, which is going to be held in Canberra on the 18th of June, jointly with Griffiths University and also with Transparency International and other partners. So that'll be a really interesting day, and we're going to talk about, what should be the principles in relation to a whistleblower protection authority. But other work we've done, we've just recently made a submission on the APRA governance review, so that went in quite recently. APRA came out with some proposals about the governance of APRA regulated institutions, and we've put in quite a big submission on that. We had a lot of engagement from members. So it's really about, and actually when you think about it too, all the work we did around the corporate governance principles and recommendations, it's about ensuring that there is trust in public institutions of all kinds, public institutions, but also companies and frameworks and systems. And then the other real strand to the work we do is about, efficient and resilient organisations. So we've been doing quite a lot of work on AI, so that really AI is going to be transformative. And it's interesting when you think about one of the things that we've done recently. We worked with the RCD on effective board minutes and AI, the use of AI. AI is finding its way into all sorts of things, and there's some real opportunities. So we'll be doing more thought leadership, but also more submissions on the sorts of AI frameworks and legislative frameworks as that unfolds. But it's going to be also something that goes to the resilience and productivity of Australian organisations. Technology, we've got to make sure that Australia is keeping up in terms of what's happening globally to be productive. And certainly we've seen the new government has signalled very strongly that productivity is a theme for it, is a theme, and it's something that's going to be worked on. And we'll be making a submission. The Productivity Commission has got 5 inquiries running at the moment, so we're going to be making submissions on 2 aspects of the inquiry. So, yeah, trusted institutions and productive and resilient. I think they're the sort of themes that we're working around for the rest of the year.
Fantastic, and you're 100% correct. AI is a big one. That is a very topical one, particularly
absolutely.
For that transformation happening across the board.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what were some of the findings, particularly of the joint statement that was recently on board minutes and the implementation of AI?
So really what we did there was there's been a lot of discussion about, can I just get AI to take board minutes? And I think the bottom line of the joint statement really is, well, you can certainly use it for drafts, but you've got to make sure that there's human oversight. And that minutes are not just a record. So what comes out of AI is typically a transcript. I mean, you can refine that obviously with the use of AI, but it's making sure that there is real human oversight into that whole process, and ensuring that a governance professional company secretary reviews anything that you do, and also that the directors and the chair also play their part in making sure that the minutes are really capture the decisions and the essence of what was decided at a board meeting. And there are some very nuanced discussions that take place in board meetings. So I think AI is not quite there yet, but certainly I know from talking to members, lots of people are looking at it, particularly in terms of some of the efficiencies that they might be able to gain, and really looking for tools that can help them.
Absolutely. Well, look, that's all my questions, and thank you so much
My
for
pleasure.
coming in today and having a chat, and looking forward to everything that's on the cards coming up for the rest of the year for the Governance Institute.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks, Catherine.